The moon hung high over the kingdom of Sylvorn, casting a silver glow across the ancient stone walls of the pack's ceremonial grounds. The air was thick with anticipation, but for Selene, the cool breeze did little to calm the storm raging inside her. Tonight was supposed to be her night, the night she and Kyle, the future alpha of Sylvorn, would finally claim their bond before the entire pack. She stood at the center of the gathering, her heart pounding in her chest. The elders had already begun their chants, the sound echoing through the forest that surrounded the castle, but Selene couldn't focus on the words. Her eyes were fixed on Kyle, standing at the altar with a determined expression, his strong posture radiating the quiet power of a future leader. Her mate. The man she had known all her life, the one who had always been there even when the world seemed against her. Kyle had always been the one, hadn't he? "Selene," the voice of the High Elder called out, breaking her thoughts. "Step forward, daughter of Sylvorn, and claim your place beside your mate." Selene's heart skipped a beat. It was time. With shaky hands she stepped forward, feeling the weight of everyone's eyes on her. The pack, her family and her friends were all gathered to witness this sacred bond. She felt a pang of uncertainty, but she pushed it aside. This was her destiny, and she would not let fear take it from her. As she approached the altar, Kyle's gaze met hers. His eyes, usually warm and full of affection, were distant, unreadable. She felt a chill run down her spine. This was not the man she had known, the man she had dreamed of standing beside for the rest of her life. What was happening? The High Elder began the ritual, speaking words that had been passed down for centuries. They were supposed to bring two hearts together, to bind them in the eternal bond of matehood. But as Selene stepped closer to Kyle, her heart began to pound even harder, each beat a desperate plea for this to be real, for everything to go as she had imagined. Kyle reached out to take her hands in his, and for a moment Selene thought she felt the warmth of his touch. But then he hesitated. The moment dragged on, and Selene's breath caught in her throat. Something was wrong. "Kyle," she whispered, but he didn't answer. Instead, his eyes flicked briefly to the High Elder before returning to her face, now cold, emotionless. Her stomach dropped. "I cannot," Kyle said, his voice steady but distant, though a shadow of something darker lingered in his words. "You are not my mate, Selene." The words hit her like a blow, a sharp, cruel punch to the chest. She froze, unable to speak, her mind a whirlwind of disbelief. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The crowd fell silent, and for a moment the only sound was the beating of Selene's heart in her ears. She could barely breathe. Her eyes searched Kyle's face, looking for any sign of regret, but found none. He stood there, a stranger in the place of the man she thought she knew. "I reject you," Kyle continued, his voice clear and cold. "As my mate. You are not the one I choose. Not now, not ever." A gasp rippled through the crowd, and Selene felt her legs give way beneath her. She stumbled, barely catching herself as her vision blurred. The world around her spun, and for a moment she thought she might fall. The pain was unbearable, and yet there was no escape. "Kyle, please," she choked, her voice breaking. "What are you—" He turned away without another word, leaving her standing in the center of the circle, abandoned in front of everyone who had ever known her. The shame, the humiliation, crashed over her like a tidal wave. Her breath caught in her throat as the crowd murmured, whispers growing louder, sharper, each word like a knife. She could hear the judgment in their voices. The High Elder's voice rose again, but Selene barely heard it. She was drowning in the weight of the rejection, her world crumbling around her. Her knees buckled, and she fell to the ground, her hands pressing into the cold earth beneath her. The ritual had ended, the bond broken, and with it, the future she had dreamed of. "Selene," came a voice from the crowd, but she couldn't look up. She couldn't bear to face anyone, especially Kyle, who had just destroyed her world. She didn't know how long she stayed there, kneeling in the dirt, unable to move, unable to think. The night was quiet now, but inside her, everything was in chaos. Her heart was shattered, and she felt as though she had lost herself completely. A figure approached her, but she didn't look up. She didn't want to see anyone. She couldn't face the pity, the whispers. She couldn't even face the fear that was now consuming her. "Selene," the voice said again, softer this time. It was the High Elder. "Come, you must not remain here." But Selene didn't move. Not yet. Not until she could somehow, someway, find the strength to stand again. The world felt impossibly heavy, and the shame, the humiliation clung to her like a second skin. This wasn't the night she had imagined. This wasn't the future she had planned. Everything had shattered in that one moment, and she didn't know how to piece it together again. The world around her seemed to fade, and she was left alone with her pain, her broken heart, and a future that was no longer hers to claim. The silence that followed Kayle's rejection was deafening. Selene remained on her knees, her heart still hammering in her chest as the full weight of the moment sank in. The murmurs of the pack washed over her, distant and distorted, like the sound of waves crashing against a cliff. She couldn't understand their words, only the judgment in their eyes, the pity that she could feel from every direction. Her body trembled, but she couldn't move. She was rooted to the ground, unable to escape the brutal reality of what had just happened. Her mind replayed Kayle's words over and over, each repetition a new wound opening within her. "I reject you. You are not my mate." His cold, emotionless tone echoed through her thoughts like a haunting refrain. For the longest time she stayed there, her face hidden from the world, too ashamed to lift her head. The moon above, once a source of comfort, now felt like a distant reminder of the world she had lost. The cold air did nothing to soothe the burning ache in her chest. She wanted to scream, to cry, but all that came out was a quiet sob that she quickly smothered with her hands. "Selene," a voice called softly, breaking through the fog of her grief. It was her mother, Leora, her gentle touch brushing the back of Selene's shoulder. "You must get up, daughter. The night is still young. You don't belong here, not like this." Reluctantly, Selene lifted her head. The world around her was a blur of faces, but she could make out the worried expression of her mother. Leora's face was as pale as Selene's, her eyes reflecting a deep sadness, though there was no judgment there, only concern. "I don't know how to face them," Selene whispered, her voice thick with the weight of her shame. "Kyle, I never thought he'd do this. I thought I was his." Leora knelt beside her, pulling Selene into a tight embrace, as though she could shield her from the weight of the pack's eyes. "You were his, Selene. But sometimes the heart chooses differently. This rejection isn't about you. It's about him." Selene's eyes welled up with tears again, but she fought them back. She couldn't cry, not here, not in front of everyone. Instead, she stood, pushing herself up from the ground. Her legs were shaky, but she forced herself to take a step forward, to leave the ceremonial grounds behind. Her mother stayed close, her presence a quiet comfort. The air outside the circle felt colder, sharper. Selene could feel the eyes of the pack still on her, but it didn't matter anymore. She couldn't stay. The pack had already chosen their side by witnessing the ritual. She had been rejected before their eyes, her place among them now uncertain. "Where will you go?" Leora asked, her voice gentle, but Selene could hear the worry beneath it. Selene paused for a moment, staring into the distance. She could hear the rustling of the forest, the whisper of the wind among the trees. She had always found solace in the woods, in the quiet that it offered, but tonight it seemed so far away. Still, it was her only option. "To the woods," she said softly. "I need to be alone. I need to think." Leora nodded, her lips pressed tightly together, but she didn't try to stop her. "I'll stay close, just be careful, Selene." "The forest is not the same at night." Selene nodded absently, not really hearing her mother's warning. She was numb, her mind unable to process anything fully. Kyle's rejection still echoed in her ears, and her heart felt like it was being crushed with every step she took. The distance between her and the pack widened with each stride, and yet the humiliation seemed to follow her, a shadow that refused to let go. As she walked deeper into the woods, the trees closed in around her, their twisted branches looming like silent sentinels. The night was heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth, but none of it brought her peace. Instead, it only made her feel more isolated. more disconnected from everything she had once known. A chill ran through her as she moved farther into the darkness. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. If she did, the weight of the world would crush her. The rejection, the whispers, the eyes of the pack, everything felt too much to bear. Finally, Selene found a small clearing, a quiet place hidden deep within the woods. She sank to the ground, her legs giving out beneath her. The earth was cold, but it felt somehow familiar, like it was offering her a place to grieve, a place to be broken. Her tears came then, freely, with no one around to witness them. The sobs racked her body, each one a release of the pain she had held inside for far too long. She didn't know how long she cried, only that her tears seemed endless, pouring from her in waves. When the tears finally slowed and the silence returned, Selene could still feel the weight of the rejection pressing down on her. She didn't know what to do now. Her future had been ripped away in a single moment, and she didn't know how to rebuild it. How could she? The stars above twinkled coldly, offering no answers. The forest around her whispered, but its words were lost in the wind. There was nothing left but the emptiness inside her. The days following Kale's rejection dragged on like an endless storm. Selene moved through the motions of her life, her body functioning as though it were on autopilot, but her mind was elsewhere. The rejection gnawed at her with every passing moment. Her thoughts constantly circled back to that moment. Kyle's words, the finality in his eyes, the coldness in his tone. She had avoided the pack as much as possible, retreating to the outskirts of the kingdom. The dense forests around Sylvorn became her only refuge, offering a quiet escape from the whispers and the stares. Yet even in the solitude, the weight of her shattered world remained. There was no escaping the truth. Kyle had rejected her, and there was no going back. It was on the 5th day of her retreat, when the air had begun to feel like the first whispers of autumn, that Selene first heard the news. The Alpha King, Darian, was coming to Sylvorn. The announcement came during the early hours of the morning, a small group of pack elders arriving at the clearing where Selene had made her temporary home. The Alpha King was a distant figure, a legend to many, but to Selene he was a name she had heard in hushed tones, a shadow on the edge of the kingdom's power. The rumors spoke of his strength, his ruthlessness, and most of all, his undeniable charm. His reign had been marked by victories and alliances, but little else was known about him. He was a man of mystery, a force unto himself. As the news settled into her bones, Selene felt an unfamiliar stir inside her, a mixture of curiosity and wariness. She hadn't planned on seeing anyone, least of all the Alpha King. She had no interest in the political machinations of Sylvorn or the power struggles that came with them. But when the messengers described his arrival as imminent, Selene couldn't help but feel a pull. It wasn't the king himself that troubled her, not directly. It was what his arrival represented. Darian's presence would mark the beginning of something new for Sylvorn, something that could change the course of the kingdom, and perhaps even her own fate. She had been an afterthought in the eyes of her own pack, a discarded mate, and now a powerful king was stepping into their midst. She wasn't sure what to expect, but she knew that the days ahead would not be the same. The morning of his arrival, Selene found herself standing at the edge of the pack's central courtyard, watching as the pack members gathered. There was a nervous excitement in the air, a current of energy that hummed just beneath the surface. The older members of the pack stood tall and composed, their faces set in expressions of respect and reverence. The younger wolves, on the other hand, were fidgeting, eager for the first glimpse of the Alpha King. Selene, however, felt a strange sense of detachment. She had no place in this world anymore. Her bond to Kale had been severed, and her future was unclear. Still, there was something about the tension in the air that kept her rooted in place. The Alpha King was coming, and she couldn't bring herself to walk away. The gates to the pack's main hall opened with a great creak, and through them he entered. Darian was everything the rumors had promised and more. His presence was commanding, his form tall and strong, his eyes a piercing blue that seemed to hold the weight of centuries. He walked with a quiet confidence, his dark hair flowing behind him like a shadow, his gaze sweeping over the gathered pack as though he were assessing each one of them in an instant. As he approached, Selene felt an odd sensation flutter in her chest, a strange twinge of recognition. It wasn't love, not yet, but there was something undeniable about the way he carried himself, something primal that stirred in her blood. She couldn't understand it, but it was there. A pull. Darian's gaze moved across the gathered wolves, pausing briefly on the elder members, before settling on Selene. For a moment, everything seemed to pause. The world, the people, the sounds, all of it faded away, leaving only her and him. His eyes lingered for the briefest of seconds, and Selene's breath caught in her throat. She quickly looked away, afraid he might see something in her eyes that she herself couldn't name. He continued his procession without a word, his arrival marked by silence and power. His presence was enough to command respect, and the air seemed to hum with the electricity of his dominance. "Selene, you're standing still," a voice whispered behind her. It was Leora, her mother, who had silently joined her. "You must go inside, you shouldn't stay out here." Selene nodded absent-mindedly but didn't move. She couldn't. She was rooted to the spot, her heart beating faster with every moment that passed. Darian had arrived, and already his presence seemed to be changing everything. "Who is he?" Selene asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't know why she asked. She had heard the stories, the legends, but now, standing only yards away from the Alpha King himself, she realized how little she truly knew. "His name is Darian," Leora replied softly. "The Alpha King. He is not just the ruler of this pack, but of many others across the realm. He has come to claim his place here." Selene nodded, her eyes still fixed on the man who had somehow already unsettled her, without even saying a word. The air around them seemed to thicken with a new tension, a strange energy that only Darian's presence could bring. She couldn't understand it, but she felt it in her bones. The Alpha King had arrived, and everything was about to change. The evening of Darian's arrival had passed in a blur. The Alpha King, a figure of myth and power, had swept through the castle like a storm, and with him came a shift that no one could ignore. The pack, once content in its routine, now seemed to be waiting, holding its breath for whatever would come next. But as Selene lay awake that night, staring at the dark ceiling above her, she had no idea how much her life would change with the rising of the next sun. The following morning, Selene found herself summoned to the center of the pack grounds, a place she had once felt safe, now filled with unfamiliar faces and whispered rumors. Her mind was still clouded from the events of the previous night. She had tried to stay away, tried to hide from the world she had once known, but the pull of the pack was too strong. It was there that everything seemed to converge, and no matter how much she wished to retreat into herself, she couldn't escape the eyes that followed her every movement. As Selene stepped into the open courtyard, she immediately felt the weight of everyone's gaze. The pack had gathered, their murmurs fading into silence as she approached. At the center of it all stood Darian, his tall figure a presence that seemed to command the very air around him. He was speaking with the High Elder, but his eyes drifted toward her, and for the briefest of moments their gazes locked. A shiver ran down Selene's spine, and she quickly looked away, trying to steady her breath. She had no reason to feel nervous, no reason to feel this strange pull in her chest, but the attraction was undeniable. The Alpha King was an enigma, a figure whose presence alone seemed to make the world around him bend. "Selene!" Darian's voice rang out, smooth and commanding, breaking the silence that had descended upon the courtyard. "Come forward." Her heart skipped in her chest, and her legs moved before her mind could process. She didn't know why she walked toward him, why the sound of his voice called to her in a way that no other had. But there she was, standing before him, the crowd around her seeming to disappear into the background. Darian's gaze never left her as she stopped in front of him. His eyes, those piercing blue orbs, seemed to see straight through her, as though he could read every secret she kept hidden in the depths of her soul. "I know this is unexpected," Darian began, his voice low but clear. "But I must act swiftly. The moment I have waited for has come." Selene's heart raced. She didn't understand what he meant. Was this another test, another ritual? Her body tensed, every fiber of her being telling her to retreat, but she stood frozen in place, her mind a whirlwind of questions. Before she could speak, Darian reached out, his hand brushing against the side of her face. The touch was gentle, but there was an undeniable power in it, an energy that surged through her the moment his skin made contact with hers. "I claim you," he whispered, his voice low and firm. It was like a spark had been lit inside her, a fire that ignited with his words. The world around them seemed to fade, and the pack, the surroundings, even the very air itself held its breath as Darian's hand moved to the back of her neck. His fingers pressed lightly against her skin, his presence overwhelming, and then, without warning, he marked her. A sharp pain shot through her, and Selene gasped, her hands instinctively reaching for her neck where the mark had been branded into her skin. It was a symbol of ownership, a bond that could never be broken, a bond that tied her to Darian in a way that defied understanding. The crowd erupted in shocked gasps, the whispers swelling around her like a storm. Selene's mind spun, her heart racing as she tried to comprehend what had just happened. She had been marked, publicly, in front of the entire pack. It was an act that carried immense weight, an irreversible declaration that no one could ignore. Darian's grip on her neck tightened for a brief moment before he released her, his eyes locking with hers once more. There was no hint of hesitation in his gaze, no sign of doubt. His expression was firm, resolute. "You are mine, Selene," he said, his voice like thunder in the quiet that had followed the marking. Her mind was reeling, her thoughts a tangled mess. The world seemed to spin around her, and she felt the weight of the pack's eyes on her, their collective breath held in anticipation of what would come next. The mark burned against her skin, an unrelenting reminder of what had just occurred. As the realization began to sink in, a storm of emotions rose within her: confusion, anger, fear. The connection between her and Cale, the mate she had once believed was hers, had been severed in the harshest of ways. And now, before her, stood the Alpha King, who had marked her without warning or consent, binding her to him in a way she couldn't escape. But even as the storm raged inside her, there was something else, something unexpected. Beneath the confusion and fear, there was a flicker of something else, an undeniable pull, a feeling that seemed to anchor her to Darian in ways she could not explain. "Why?" she whispered, her voice trembling as she looked up at him, still trying to make sense of it all. Darian didn't answer immediately. His gaze softened just a fraction, and for the first time Selene saw a flicker of something other than authority in his eyes. "Because I knew you were mine the moment I saw you," he said, his voice quieter now, but no less intense. The mark burned once more, and Selene realized that her life, her future, had just been rewritten in a way she could never have anticipated. The Alpha King had marked her in front of everyone, and there was no going back. The days after Darian's shocking claim were filled with tension and confusion. Selene felt like a spectator in her own life, unable to escape the consequences of the Alpha King's mark. The pain of it lingered, both physical and emotional, as she tried to process what had happened. Every glance from the pack, every whisper behind her back felt like an assault. And despite the weight of it all, Darian remained unwavering, his presence now a constant force in her life. At night, when the world was quiet, Selene often found herself awake, staring at the ceiling, wrestling with the questions she couldn't answer. Why had Darian chosen her? Why had he marked her in front of the pack? She wasn't ready for any of this. Her mind still clung to Kyle, to the life she thought she would have had with him, but that future had crumbled in front of her. Darian, for all his power, had placed her in a position she wasn't sure she was ready to accept. There were moments when his authority, his dominance, felt suffocating. She didn't know how to navigate this new reality, where she was bound to a man she barely knew, let alone understand. The next morning, Darian summoned her to the main hall, and Selene reluctantly obeyed. His presence was commanding, even in the stillness of the castle. She found herself standing before him again, unsure of what he wanted this time. He didn't speak at first, simply watching her with those piercing blue eyes, as if he could see the turmoil inside her. "Sit," he ordered, his voice firm but not unkind. Selene hesitated, but eventually lowered herself into the chair across from him. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, each of them standing on the precipice of a new and uncertain future. Darian's gaze was unreadable, but she could feel the weight of it pressing on her. He wasn't waiting for her to speak. Instead, he seemed content to let the silence stretch on, the tension between them palpable. Finally, he broke the quiet. "I know you don't understand what's happening," he began, his voice low and controlled. "I know this is difficult for you. But you need to understand something, Selene. The pack looks to you now. They see what I've done and they expect you to stand with me." Selene's heart tightened in her chest. She hadn't asked for any of this. She had never wanted to be in the spotlight, to be thrust into a role she wasn't prepared for. She had never asked to be the center of attention, to have the weight of an entire pack resting on her shoulders. "I didn't ask for this," she said, her voice shaky but firm. "I didn't ask for any of this, Darian. I don't even know you. I don't know what you want from me." Darian's eyes softened just a fraction, but there was no mistaking the power in his gaze. He leaned forward slightly, his voice still calm but laced with authority. "What I want from you, Selene, is simple. I want you to accept your place by my side. You are my mate, my equal now. This bond, it's not just for show, it's real, and it's binding. The pack expects it. I expect it." Her chest tightened, and she clenched her hands in her lap. The mark burned against her skin, a constant reminder of the bond they now shared. But it wasn't just that, it was the weight of responsibility, the expectations that came with it. She hadn't asked for any of it. She hadn't asked to be thrust into the heart of a political power struggle. But now, with Darian's words echoing in her mind, she realized there was no turning back. "I don't know if I can do this," she admitted, her voice quiet but full of conviction. "I don't know if I can stand by your side, not when I don't even understand what it means, not when I don't even understand you." Darian's gaze darkened for a moment, but his expression remained composed. "I never said it would be easy," he replied. "You've been thrust into a position of power whether you like it or not. But you have a choice. You can either rise to meet it or fall beneath it. I'm not asking for blind obedience, Selene. I'm asking for your trust." Her breath caught in her throat. Trust. The word seemed so heavy, so loaded with meaning. How could she trust him when everything inside her screamed to run, to flee from the bond that had been forced upon her? How could she trust him when she didn't even know what he wanted from her, what he expected her to become? Darian watched her closely, as if waiting for her to make her decision. But Selene felt no clarity, no easy answer. She was trapped between the past she could never return to and the future she couldn't fully comprehend. "You need to make a choice, Selene," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "I will be by your side, but you have to decide whether you're ready to stand beside me. Because if you're not, then this bond, this pack, everything we've built, it will crumble." The weight of his words hung in the air, and for a moment Selene didn't know what to say. She didn't know what to feel. She wanted to run, to escape from the pressure, but she also knew that she couldn't. Not anymore. The bond had been forged, and there was no way to break it. "I need time," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Darian regarded her for a moment longer, his eyes searching hers. Then, with a slow nod, he stood. "I will give you time. But understand this, Selene. Time is a luxury we don't have." As he turned to leave, Selene remained seated, her mind spinning with the enormity of what she had just agreed to. She was no longer just Selene, the girl who had been rejected by Cale. She was now a part of something much larger, something far more dangerous, and whether she was ready or not, she was about to be thrust into the heart of it all. The days that followed Darian's marking of Selene were filled with quiet tension. She found herself torn between the bond she now shared with him and the overwhelming sense of uncertainty that continued to cloud her thoughts. The mark, though painful and raw, was a constant reminder of the force that was drawing them together, whether she was ready for it or not. Darian's presence loomed over everything. He was always there, whether in the hallways of the castle or in the garden where she sought solitude. His eyes never strayed far from her, his gaze a constant weight on her chest. She had never been the type to crave attention, And yet, under his watchful eye, she could not escape the feeling that she was constantly being scrutinized. But it wasn't just Darian's attention that unsettled her. There were whispers, growing louder each day, about the Alpha King's arrival and the future of the pack. Rumors swirled like a storm, filled with speculation about Darian's rule, his intentions, and most unsettling of all, his past. No one seemed to know exactly where he had come from, and no one dared ask. The air in the castle had changed, thickened with an unspoken tension. The pack was on edge, the members unsure of where they stood in this new order Darian was establishing. Selene could feel it too. There was something beneath the surface, a hidden threat that no one was talking about, but that everyone felt. She could see it in the eyes of the pack members as they passed her in the halls, an unease that lingered like a shadow. They didn't trust Darian fully, and they certainly didn't trust her, not yet. She was an outsider, a mark of something she didn't understand, and she could feel the cold distance between her and the rest of the pack. It was in the dead of night, when the castle was bathed in the eerie glow of moonlight, that Selene first saw the cracks in the facade. She had been walking through the corridors of the castle, her mind heavy with thoughts she couldn't shake, when she heard voices ahead of her. Instinctively she paused, blending into the shadows to listen. "I don't like this," one voice said, low and hushed, filled with suspicion. "There's something wrong about Darian. He's hiding something, and it's not just the mark." "Keep your voice down," another voice hissed. "We don't know what he's capable of, but if he is hiding something, it's dangerous. We can't afford to cross him." Selene's heart raced, her breath catching in her throat. She recognized the voices, two of Darian's trusted lieutenants, wolves who had been with him since the beginning of his reign. What were they talking about? What was hidden in Darian's past that made them so afraid? "I don't care what happens to him," the first voice continued, with a bitterness that sent chills down Selene's spine. "I care about us. We need to be ready if things go south. If he's not what he seems, we need to act fast." Selene took a step back, her heart thundering in her chest. The voices had fallen silent, and she quickly slipped into a nearby alcove to hide. She could feel her pulse pounding in her ears, the weight of their words sinking into her gut. There was something about Darian, something hidden, something dangerous. She didn't know what it was, but she could sense it. And now more than ever she realized that her position in this kingdom, this pack, was precarious. The conversation left her with more questions than answers. Who were these wolves plotting against Darian? Why were they so intent on undermining him? And why had they singled her out with their suspicions? She had only just been marked by Darian. She wasn't sure if she even trusted him fully, but she knew she couldn't be involved in whatever these wolves were planning. As she walked back to her chambers, the weight of her thoughts threatened to overwhelm her. What had she gotten herself into? She had thought the bond with Darian would be something simple, something she could learn to accept over time. But now, she was not only caught between the Alpha King's authority and her own reluctance, but she was also standing at the edge of a dangerous game, with forces working against her, forces she didn't fully understand. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how little she truly knew about Darian and the pack. He had marked her, bound her to him, but she had no idea what kind of man he really was, what kind of king he truly aspired to be. Was he hiding something from her? Was his past filled with secrets that would haunt them both? Selene knew she had to find answers. She couldn't continue on like this, blind, uncertain, and fearful. There was more at stake now than just her own feelings. Her future, and the future of the pack, depended on the decisions she would soon have to make. The storm inside her was growing, but she didn't know yet if it would destroy her or drive her toward the truth. The tension in the air seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. Selene tried her best to navigate the new reality she found herself in, her place in Darian's world still foreign and unsettling. She had never anticipated any of this, being marked, being bound to the Alpha King, thrust into a power struggle she barely understood. But as she moved through the days, the questions continued to gnaw at her. Questions about her past, about Kyle, and the reasons behind his rejection. It was late one evening, after the sun had dipped below the horizon and the stars began to twinkle in the sky, that Selina found herself alone in the garden of the castle. The night air was cool, the scent of wildflowers and pine trees filling her lungs as she walked among the blooming plants. It was a small comfort, the peaceful solitude of the garden, but it did little to ease the storm that still raged inside her. Her thoughts were interrupted when a familiar voice called out her name, soft and cautious. "Selene!" She turned to see Cale standing at the edge of the garden, his form outlined by the moonlight. The sight of him hit her like a physical blow, and for a moment she felt the old ache in her chest, an old wound that hadn't fully healed. Seeing him now, standing before her like a shadow from the past, brought back a rush of emotions she wasn't prepared to confront. "What do you want, Cale?" she asked, her voice cool, though there was a tremor in it that she couldn't hide. Cale took a step closer, his expression guarded but filled with an intensity that caught her off guard. "I need to talk to you, please." Selina hesitated. The last time they had spoken, he had rejected her in front of the entire pack, severing the bond they had shared. The pain of that moment still lingered, and she wasn't sure she was ready to face him again. But something in his eyes made her pause, made her want to listen. "Fine," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Talk." Kyle's gaze softened slightly, and he took a deep breath before speaking. "I owe you an explanation, I know I do. But I didn't know how to give it. Not then. Not in front of everyone." Selene crossed her arms over her chest, her heart heavy. "You didn't have to do it in front of them, Kyle. You could have spared me the humiliation. You could have spared me the pain." His eyes flickered with regret, and for a moment Selene saw the Kyle she had once known, the one who had been her friend, her confidant, the one she had trusted. But that man seemed so far away now, replaced by a stranger, a man who had rejected her without explanation. "I never wanted to hurt you," Cale said, his voice low, full of sorrow. I couldn't. I couldn't be with you, not after everything." Selene frowned. "What do you mean, after everything?" Kyle hesitated, his gaze shifting to the ground, as though the weight of his words was too much for him to bear. "There's something you don't know about me, Selene. Something that I couldn't share with you. Not then, not before." She took a step toward him, her curiosity piqued despite herself. "What is it? What could possibly be so important that you had to reject me?" Kyle swallowed hard, his expression pained. "I wasn't the man you thought I was. I wasn't ready to be with anyone, not with you, not with anyone." Selene's confusion deepened. "What do you mean, Kyle? You were supposed to be my mate." "We were supposed to—" "I wasn't ready," he interrupted, his voice tight. "I had to face something about myself that I wasn't willing to confront. I'm not like you, Selene. I don't have the same strength. I'm broken in ways I don't think I can fix." His words left Selene speechless, the ache in her chest growing with every passing second. "What are you talking about?" "Kyle, you're the future Alpha. You're stronger than anyone else in this pack. You've always been—" "That's the problem," he cut in, his voice rising with frustration. "I was forced into this role, into this life, and I thought I had to be someone I'm not. I thought I had to be perfect for the pack, for everyone, but I'm not. I'm weak, Selene. I've made mistakes, and I've been carrying the weight of them alone. I couldn't bring you into that. I couldn't risk you seeing the truth." Selene stood there, stunned by the raw vulnerability in Cale's voice. She had never seen him like this, never imagined he could feel so broken. The man she had known had always been strong, confident, and secure in his place as the future Alpha. To hear him admit that he wasn't the person she had thought he was shook her to her core. "Cale," she whispered, her voice softening, "you don't have to carry this alone. You don't have to be perfect." Cale's eyes filled with emotion, but he quickly looked away. "I'm sorry, Selene. I'm sorry for everything. I didn't want to hurt you, but I was scared. I thought if I rejected you, if I pushed you away, I could protect you from the truth, from me." The silence between them stretched, heavy with unspoken words. Selene's heart ached for the man who had once been her everything. But now, as she stood before him, she realized that things could never go back to the way they were. Too much had changed. Too much had happened. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Kyle," she said, her voice trembling. Not yet. I understand, he said quietly, his voice filled with regret. I needed you to know. I needed you to understand why. As he turned and walked away, Selene felt a strange mix of emotions, sadness, anger, and a deep, aching loss. Cale had finally given her the explanation she had longed for, but it didn't change the fact that everything between them had been shattered. She could never return to the past. And yet, there was a part of her that still mourned the future she had once believed in. The weight of the past few days seemed to press in on Selene, suffocating her with every breath. She had spoken to Cale, heard his confession, and yet she couldn't shake the feeling that something inside her had broken irreparably. But even as she struggled to make sense of her feelings for him, there was Darian, constant, ever-present, a force that seemed impossible to ignore. Their relationship, whatever it was, remained a strange mix of tension and unspoken understanding. Darian had claimed her, marked her in front of the pack, and yet the air between them remained thick with uncertainty. He had never once pushed her to accept the bond completely, but his presence was unyielding. She had never been one for domination, but something in his quiet strength kept her anchored, even when the world around her seemed to spin out of control. It was during a late afternoon that Selene found herself standing in the castle courtyard, gazing out over the vast expanse of the land. The wind had picked up, rustling the leaves of the trees, and the sky was tinged with the fading light of the sun. She hadn't realized how much time had passed since she'd last ventured outside. In many ways she had been hiding, retreating from everything, but now standing here she could feel the weight of her own indecision. Darian's footsteps approached, steady and deliberate. Selene didn't need to look to know it was him. She could feel him, his presence radiating like a quiet storm. The sound of his breath behind her made her tense, but she didn't turn to face him. She was afraid of what she might see in his eyes. Selene, Darian's voice broke through the silence, low and commanding, but tinged with something softer, something she couldn't place. You've been avoiding me. I'm not avoiding you, she replied, her voice flat, though she couldn't quite mask the tremor in her words. I just needed some space. I understand, Darian said, his tone never faltering, but you're not the only one who needs space in this bond. It's not easy for either of us. Selene remained silent, feeling the weight of his words press against her chest. The truth was, Darian's presence didn't feel easy. It wasn't that she didn't trust him. It was just that the mark on her skin, the bond that tied them together, was still so new, so raw. How could she trust someone she barely knew? How could she let herself surrender to this bond when everything she thought she knew had been upended? Darian stepped closer and she could feel the heat of his body behind her. He didn't touch her, but his proximity sent a shiver down her spine. She couldn't deny the pull between them, the way her body reacted to his closeness, but she was afraid to give herself completely, afraid to lose herself in this connection that had been forced upon her. Do you trust me, Selene? Darian asked, his voice quiet now, but carrying a weight of vulnerability that surprised her. The question hung in the air, suspended between them, and for a moment she didn't know how to answer. Did she trust him? How could she? She had barely known him when he marked her, and now here she was, standing on the precipice of a life she hadn't chosen. She didn't know if she could trust him with her heart, with her future, with the darkness that still lingered in her soul. I don't know, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't know if I can trust anyone anymore. Darian's silence stretched for a moment before he spoke again, his voice softer this time. I know I'm not perfect. I know I've put you in a difficult position, but I need you to understand something. The bond we share isn't just about me marking you. It's about trust. It's about building something between us, something stronger than the past, something that can't be broken. Selene turned to face him, her eyes locking with his, and for the first time, she saw the weight of responsibility in his gaze. He wasn't just the Alpha King. He was a man who had his own fears, his own struggles. He wasn't perfect, and neither was she. But there was something in his eyes, a flicker of hope, a desire for something real that made her pause. I don't know if I can do that, she admitted, her voice shaking with the vulnerability she had been too afraid to show until now. "I don't know if I can trust you enough to let you in." Darian took a step closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "Then let me prove it to you. Let me show you that I'm not the monster you think I am. Let me prove that I can be the man you need." Selina felt her heart race as he reached out, his hand brushing against hers, a tentative touch that sent a jolt through her. The warmth of his hand against hers was enough to ignite a spark, but still she hesitated. She didn't know if she was ready to open herself up to him, to trust him with her heart, but she knew that in this moment she couldn't walk away. "I don't know if I'm ready," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Darian's hand tightened around hers, gently but firmly. "I will wait for you, Celine. But you don't have to do this alone." For a long moment they stood in silence, the weight of their shared understanding settling between them. Celine's heart thudded in her chest, her breath shaky, but she didn't pull away. She wasn't sure if she was ready to give herself completely, but in that moment she felt something begin to shift inside her. Maybe, just maybe, she could trust him. The tension in the kingdom had been building steadily over the past few weeks. Celine could feel it, like a storm brewing on the horizon. Whispers of a rival pack, one that had been growing stronger in the shadows, began to surface. They had long eyed the throne of Sylvan, but with Darian's rule their patience was wearing thin. The Alpha King's position had never been more vulnerable, and the time had come for him to prove his strength. Celine had been in the garden when the news arrived, the sound of hurried footsteps breaking her reverie. The castle staff, the warriors, the pack elders, all of them seemed to move with urgency. It wasn't long before Darian found her, his face unreadable as he approached. "We leave tomorrow," Darian said, his voice steady but with an edge to it that Celine had come to recognize, the calm before the storm. "The rival pack has made their move. They're challenging my claim to the throne." Celine's stomach dropped. She had heard rumors of a rebellion, but she hadn't realized it was coming to a head so soon. Are you going to fight them?" "I have no choice," he replied, his eyes intense. "This trial is as old as our kind. A test of strength, a fight for dominance. If they win, I lose everything. The pack, the kingdom, you." Celine's heart pounded in her chest as she processed his words. This trial, this ancient rite, was not just a battle for power, it was a battle for survival. The weight of it was crushing, and she felt a surge of fear for him, for the kingdom, for herself. Everything was hanging in the balance. "What do you need from me?" she asked, her voice a whisper, barely audible over the rising tension in the air. Darian's gaze softened just slightly, but his resolve remained unshaken. "Stay close, Celine. I will need you by my side. Your strength, your presence will be a reminder to the pack that I am not alone, that we stand together." She nodded, even though a part of her was filled with doubt. Could she truly stand by him? Could she trust him enough to be his strength when she had only just begun to trust herself? The bond between them was still so new, still so fragile, but Darian's words stirred something within her, a desire to protect, to be part of something larger than herself. She had no choice but to face what was coming, whether she was ready or not. The next day, Celine stood at Darian's side, watching as the pack gathered in the central courtyard, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation. The rival pack arrived soon after, their numbers just as impressive as Darian's. Their leader, a man tall and imposing with eyes that burned with ambition, stepped forward, his gaze locking with Darian's. "We've come to claim what is rightfully ours," the rival Alpha declared, his voice cold and authoritative. "You've ruled long enough, Darian. The time has come for a new leader." "For a new kingdom." The words hung in the air like a challenge, sharp and unforgiving. Darian's response was measured, his stance unyielding. "This kingdom belongs to the Sylvan pack. No one will take it from me." The two Alphas stood facing each other, their bodies tense with the weight of their words. Celine could feel the heat of the moment rising, the weight of the pack's collective gaze bearing down on her. This was not just about Darian's survival, it was about the survival of everyone she cared for. The trial began, and Selene watched in silence as the two leaders engaged in a contest of strength, skill, and endurance. It wasn't just a physical battle. It was a test of their very essence, a battle to determine who would be the alpha of the pack, who would lead them into the future. Darian moved with precision, his muscles rippling as he fought with a calm focus that was almost unnerving. His eyes never left his opponent, every movement calculated, every strike measured. The rival alpha was fierce, a worthy adversary, but Darian's resolve was unshakable. There was no doubt in his movements, no hesitation in his gaze. This kingdom was his, and he would fight for it with everything he had. Selene stood on the sidelines, her heart in her throat, watching as Darian fought for his life, for the kingdom, for her. She wanted to rush forward to help, but she knew this was something he had to do on his own. This was his trial, his test, and the pack was watching, waiting to see who would emerge victorious. The battle raged on, a blur of strikes and counterattacks, but slowly Darian began to gain the upper hand. His rival, though skilled, began to falter under the relentless pressure Darian applied. And with one final move, Darian took him down, his opponent crashing to the ground, unable to continue the fight. The crowd erupted in cheers, the pack roaring in approval as Darian stood victorious, bloodied but unbroken. Selene's breath caught in her throat, a mixture of relief and awe flooding her chest. He had won. He had proven himself. Darian's gaze found hers across the crowd, his eyes locking with hers for a brief moment before he turned to address his pack. This kingdom is mine, and it will remain ours forever. The pack roared again, their loyalty unwavering, and Selene felt a surge of something within her. She had seen the man Darian was, his strength, his resolve, and in that moment she knew. She had made the right choice. She would stand by him, no matter the trials that lay ahead. The tension in the castle had not faded with the defeat of the rival pack. Instead, it seemed to have intensified. Darian had secured his place as Alpha King, but Selene couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The victory should have been a time of celebration, but the whispers in the halls were growing louder, more insistent. The pack's loyalty to Darian seemed strong, but there was an undercurrent of unease, a fear that something was hidden beneath the surface. It was during one of her late walks through the castle corridors, when the halls were quiet and empty, that Selene overheard something that stopped her in her tracks. Two of the Alpha King's closest advisors, men who had served him for years, were speaking in hushed voices. Selene didn't intend to listen, but the words that reached her ears were enough to freeze her in place. "We can't let this go on much longer," one of them said, his voice low but filled with urgency. "The Alpha's secret. It will destroy him if it comes to light." Selene's heart pounded in her chest. The Alpha's secret? What were they talking about? She leaned in slightly, straining to hear more, but the conversation shifted. "If the truth gets out," the second man replied, "there will be no turning back. We've seen the power Darian commands, but this could change everything. We need to act before it's too late." Selene took a step back, her breath catching in her throat. She was shaken, unable to process what she had just overheard. What was Darian hiding? Why had no one ever mentioned this secret? She had known the Alpha King as a man of power, strength, and authority, but now she wasn't sure who he truly was. She needed answers, and she needed them quickly. The trust she had begun to place in Darian felt fragile, like a thread stretched too thin. She couldn't stand idly by, not knowing the full truth. There were too many questions swirling in her mind, and she was determined to find the answers. The following evening, after dinner, Selene made her way to Darian's private study, a quiet, secluded room where he often retreated when he needed to think or work. She stood outside the door for a long moment, her hand hovering over the handle. Was she ready to confront him about this? Could she even trust the words she had overheard? There was still so much she didn't know. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door. Darian was sitting at his desk, papers spread before him, his back to the door. He didn't hear her enter at first, and for a moment she hesitated, watching him. There was something different about him when he was alone, an air of quiet contemplation, a vulnerability that he didn't show to anyone else. He seemed almost human. something beyond the formidable Alpha King. "Darian," she called softly, stepping into the room. He turned quickly, his sharp gaze softening when he saw her. "Selene," he said, rising to his feet. "What's wrong?" "I need to know the truth," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "There are things being said, things I overheard, about you, about a secret. What aren't you telling me?" Darian's expression darkened slightly, the warmth in his eyes fading as he regarded her. "What did you hear, Selene?" Selene swallowed hard. "I heard 2 of your advisors talking. They said you're hiding something. They said that if the truth comes out, it could destroy you." There was a long silence between them. Darian's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing with a mixture of frustration and something darker. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them, but Selene didn't move, her stance firm. "Listen to me," Darian said, his voice low but intense. "I never wanted you to be part of this. I never wanted you to carry the burden of the things I've done. There are things in my past that you won't understand, things that, if known, could change everything. But I promised you that I would protect you. I promised you that I would keep you safe." Selene felt a surge of anger and confusion. "Protect me from what?" "From the truth." He sighed, his gaze flickering away as though the weight of his words was too much to bear. "You don't know what you're asking, Selene. There are things I've done, decisions I've made, that no one can ever know. Not the pack, not even you. If the truth comes to light, everything we've fought for will fall apart." "Then tell me the truth," she demanded, her voice rising. "I can't stand here living in this castle, pretending like everything is fine while you're hiding from something. I deserve to know what's going on." Darian's eyes softened then, a trace of regret in his gaze. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, but his voice was gentler this time. "I'll tell you, Selene, I will, but not now, not yet. There are too many risks involved. I need you to trust me, trust that when the time is right I will explain everything." Selene's heart ached as she looked into his eyes, trying to read him, to see through the walls he had built around himself. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust him more than anything, but the secrecy, the lies made it harder with each passing day. "I don't know if I can keep waiting for the truth, Darian," she whispered, the weight of her own uncertainty pressing down on her. "I don't know how much longer I can stand by you without knowing who you really are." Darian's gaze hardened slightly, and for a moment he said nothing, but then his hand reached out, brushing against hers gently. "I promise you, Selene," he said quietly, "the truth will come, but you need to be patient." The air between them grew thick with unspoken words, but Selene didn't pull away. She couldn't, not yet. The trust she had in Darian was still fragile, but perhaps, just perhaps, there was something deeper that tied them together. But for how long would she be able to stand by and wait for the truth? The days following her confrontation with Darian felt like a whirlwind. Selene could no longer ignore the weight of the questions swirling in her mind, nor the deep unease that seemed to settle in her chest. She had made the decision to stand by Darian, to trust him despite everything, but the truth he was hiding continued to haunt her. How long could she stand by, waiting for answers that might never come? It was a cold evening when she found herself walking through the castle's quiet hallways once more, unable to sleep, her mind racing. The stone walls seemed to close in on her, the weight of her thoughts pressing down on her. She was torn, uncertain of her next step. Darian's promise to tell her the truth had done little to ease the storm inside her. Every time she tried to push her doubts aside, they resurfaced, sharper than before. The flickering light from the torches along the walls cast shadows that danced across the hallway, giving the castle a ghostly, eerie feel. Selene paused as she passed Darian's study, the door slightly ajar. Without thinking, she stopped, her hand reaching out to touch the cool wood. She had promised him she would wait, but the temptation to know more, to finally understand the man she had bound herself to, was too great. She needed answers, and she needed them now. Slowly, she pushed the door open, stepping into the study. The air inside was thick with the scent of parchment and ink, the familiar surroundings offering little comfort. Darian was seated at his desk, his back to her, writing something in the dim light. He looked different tonight, distant, almost lost in his thoughts. She hesitated, watching him for a moment, wondering if he even realized she was there. "Darian," she said softly, her voice tentative. He didn't flinch, didn't look up at her immediately. For a moment she wondered if he had heard her at all. But then his shoulders tensed, and slowly he turned to face her. His gaze softened when he saw her, but there was a familiar hardness in his eyes that made her heart ache. She had seen that look too many times before, the weight of responsibility, the burden of secrets he carried. "Celine," he murmured, his voice calm but heavy, "I didn't expect you tonight." "I couldn't wait anymore," she said, her voice quieter now but steady. "I need to know the truth. I can't keep standing in the dark, wondering what you're hiding from me." Darian leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming lightly on the desk. The silence between them felt like a chasm, the space between them widening with every passing second. He seemed to be weighing his words, choosing them carefully, as though everyone held the potential to change everything. "I told you," he said at last, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't want to drag you into this. I didn't want you to be part of the darkness that follows me." "Then let me decide," Celine replied, stepping closer, her voice firm. "Let me decide if I can handle the truth. I'm not a child, Darian. I can take whatever it is you're hiding." Darian's eyes darkened, and for a moment she saw something there, something raw, something broken. But it was gone almost as quickly as it had appeared, replaced by the stoic mask he wore so well. He stood then, moving around the desk to close the distance between them, his steps heavy with purpose. "I never wanted to be the man I became," he said quietly, his voice laced with regret. "There are things in my past, choices I made, that I can never take back. I thought I could bury them, forget them, but they follow me, they haunt me." Celine's heart tightened. She had always known Darian was a man of secrets, but hearing the pain in his voice, seeing the vulnerability in his eyes, made her chest ache. She wanted to reach out to him to take away his pain, but she didn't know how. "Tell me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What is it, Darian? What happened?" He took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling with the weight of what he was about to say. "When I first became Alpha, I made a deal with a power that promised me strength, promised me dominance. But in exchange, I had to do things, horrible things, things that no one could ever know. I thought I could control it, that I could use it to protect the pack, to protect you. But the cost was always too high." Celine's heart raced as she listened, the pieces of the puzzle starting to fit together, but still leaving her with more questions than answers. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice trembling, her body taut with anticipation. Darian's gaze fell, his voice quiet, almost apologetic. "I made sacrifices. I killed when I didn't have to. I betrayed those closest to me. And I did it all for power, for control." The words hit her like a physical blow, each one cutting deeper than she had expected. She felt as though the ground had shifted beneath her feet, as though the very foundation of everything she had believed in had been shattered. Darian wasn't the man she had imagined. He wasn't just a king. He was a man with blood on his hands, a man who had made choices she couldn't fully comprehend. "And now?" Celine asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What happens now?" Darian's gaze lifted, meeting hers. "Now, we live with the consequences. But I want to make things right. I want to protect you, Celine. I want to build something better. But I can't do it alone." The silence between them grew heavy, and for the first time Celine wasn't sure what to say. The truth had been laid bare, and the man standing before her was not the man she had thought he was. But despite everything, there was still something in her heart, something that told her that she couldn't turn away, not yet. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of the moment. "But I can't leave you either." Darian nodded slowly, as though he had expected her answer, but there was no relief in his expression, only the acceptance of the weight of what he had shared. The truth had come, but it had left her with more questions than answers. And as much as she wanted to walk away, to escape from the chaos of it all, Selene knew she wasn't ready to let go of him. Not yet. The nights in the castle were growing colder as winter's bite began to creep into the stone walls. Selene had found little peace since Darian had confessed his dark past to her. The weight of his truth, the terrible cost of his ambition, still hung heavily on her heart. She wanted to trust him, to believe that the man standing before her was capable of change, of redemption. But each passing day seemed to pull her deeper into a web of uncertainty. How much of him was still the man she thought she knew? How much was buried beneath the weight of his secrets? It was on the third evening after their conversation, when she had finally begun to settle her thoughts, that the calm shattered. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the halls, followed by a rapid knock at her door. She opened it to find one of Darian's closest advisors, a familiar face who always seemed composed and calm. Corin. His expression was tight with urgency. "Selene, you need to come with me," he said, his voice low but commanding. "What's going on?" she asked, her pulse quickening at the sight of his tense demeanor. His face gave nothing away, but the way he avoided meeting her eyes made her uneasy. "There's no time to explain," Corin said, taking a step forward. "You must come with me." "Now." Selene hesitated, looking behind her at the empty room, then back at Corin. The strange urgency in his tone unsettled her, but the fear in his eyes made her take the first step forward. Whatever was happening, it felt too important to ignore. They walked quickly through the darkened corridors, their footsteps muffled against the cold stone. Selene's heart pounded in her chest, a feeling of dread growing stronger with each step. They reached a secluded part of the castle, one that Selene rarely visited. The further they went, the more the air seemed thick with tension, as if the castle itself was holding its breath. Finally they stopped at a door, one Selene had never seen before. Corin unlocked it with a key he pulled from his coat, and the door creaked open to reveal a dimly lit room. The air inside was stale, filled with the scent of old papers and dust. A large wooden desk sat in the center, and upon it several open scrolls and maps were spread out haphazardly. But it wasn't the room that caught Selene's attention. It was what was in the corner. Darian stood there, his back to her, his broad frame tense as he looked down at the figure kneeling before him. The figure was hooded, their identity hidden in the shadows. As Selene's eyes adjusted to the dim light, she realized the figure was not alone. There were others, men and women, all with their heads bowed, their forms concealed by shadows. The sight was chilling. "So what's going on here?" Selene asked, her voice shaking as she looked from Darian to Corin. Corin didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped aside, allowing Selene a clear view of the scene. Slowly, Darian turned toward her. His face, usually so composed, was now hardened, his jaw clenched tightly as if bracing for something. "This is not what it seems," Darian said, his voice low, his gaze flickering to the hooded figure before returning to her. "Selene, please understand. There are things I've done, things I had no choice but to do. The pack needs stability. The kingdom needs it." The words hit Selene like a slap. She could feel the air leave her lungs, the world around her spinning as she tried to make sense of what was happening. This wasn't just about him anymore. The tension, the secrecy. This was something much bigger. "I don't understand," Selene said, her voice rising as she stepped closer to Darian. "What is this? Who are these people? Why are you hiding this from me?" Darian's eyes flickered with something. Was it regret? But he didn't answer immediately. He turned his back to her once more, facing the group of shadowed figures. "It's for the greater good," Darian murmured, as if trying to convince himself more than her. "For the safety of the pack, for Sylvan, we must ensure that no one threatens our rule. No one gets in our way." A chill ran down Selene's spine. This wasn't the man she thought she knew. This wasn't the alpha who had promised her a future, who had marked her as his mate. She was beginning to see the truth, and it was darker than she ever could have imagined. Without thinking, she took a step forward, her eyes locked on the hooded figure who remained kneeling before Darian. "What did you do?" she whispered, her breath catching in her throat. Darian's face hardened as he turned back toward her. I did what had to be done, what we both agreed upon. Agreed upon, Selene repeated, her voice rising with disbelief. I never agreed to this, Darian. I never agreed to any of this. At her words, the hooded figure slowly stood, their face still concealed in darkness. They took a step toward Selene, and as they did, a glint of recognition flashed across Selene's face. Something in the shape of their posture, something in their presence, struck a familiar chord deep inside her. Before she could react, the hooded figure reached up, pulling the hood away from their face. Selene's breath caught in her throat. Standing before her was someone she never thought she'd see again. Kyle, she breathed, her heart sinking. The betrayal hit her like a physical blow. The room seemed to close in on Selene, her breath coming in shallow bursts as she stared at Kyle, the man who had once been her everything. Her heart pounded in her chest and her world began to feel like it was unraveling before her eyes. Kyle, the man who had rejected her, now stood before her as part of a shadowy conspiracy with Darian, her mate, her Alpha King. The betrayal was too much to process, too overwhelming to accept. Kyle, she whispered, her voice barely audible. What are you doing here? How could you— Kyle's eyes, once filled with warmth and affection, were now cold and distant. There was no trace of the man she had known, the man she had once believed was her true mate. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't decipher, one of regret, perhaps, but also something darker, something calculating. You don't understand, Selene, Kyle said, his voice rough as if the words themselves pained him. I never wanted to hurt you, but the pack, Darian, they need me. Her heart twisted in her chest. The betrayal was not only personal but political. The very foundation of her world, her trust in the people around her, was crumbling. No, Selene said, shaking her head, her voice rising with a mix of anger and disbelief. No, Kyle, you left me. You rejected me in front of everyone, and now you're working with him? After everything? I never wanted this, Selene, Kyle replied, his tone low and pleading, though there was a sharpness in his eyes. But the pack is fractured. Darian, he's not the leader we need. We've been living under his rule for too long, and things are about to change. I had to make a choice. Selene felt a lump form in her throat as she tried to process his words. Darian, her Alpha King, the man she had promised to stand beside, was now the very person Kale, her former mate, was challenging. The kingdom was on the edge of war, and she was caught in the middle of a battle for control that she hadn't even seen coming. I thought you were my ally, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I thought you were my friend. I trusted you. Kyle flinched at her words, but his resolve didn't waver. I never wanted to betray you, Selene. But Darian's choices have led us to this point. His grip on the kingdom is weakening, and He hesitated, his jaw tightening. I'm doing what I have to in order to protect Sylvorn, to protect the pack. A bitter laugh escaped Selene's lips as she took a step back. Protect the pack? By aligning yourself with him, with Darian? The room was thick with tension, and Selene could feel the weight of the decision she now had to make. She was torn between the two men, the two forces in her life who had shaped her fate. On one side was Darian, the Alpha King who had marked her as his mate, bound her to him with his power, his promise of protection. On the other was Kyle, the man who had once been her future, her mate, who had abandoned her when she needed him the most, only to return now with a vendetta against the very man she had pledged herself to. The weight of her heartache threatened to crush her. She had never imagined she would be in this position, caught between two men who had shaped her destiny, forced to choose between loyalty and love. Darian isn't the monster you think he is, she said, her voice trembling with the rawness of the emotions flooding her. He may have made mistakes, but he's not the man you're trying to make him out to be. And She choked on the words but forced them out anyway. I don't know where I stand anymore. I don't know who I can trust. Kyle's eyes softened for a fleeting moment, but the hardness soon returned. I know you're torn, Selene, but the pack needs a leader who will make the tough choices, a leader who will do whatever it takes to keep us strong. The realization hit Selene like a slap. The kingdom was at war, not just with an outside enemy, but within its very walls. Darien's reign was threatened, not only by Chaol's return, but by the faction of the Pack who had long been loyal to him. The battle for Sylvorn was no longer just about power. It was about survival. "I will never be a part of this," Selene whispered, her heart breaking with the weight of her decision. "I won't fight against Darien, not like this." Chaol's expression faltered, a flicker of something, maybe regret, maybe pain, crossing his face. "You don't understand. This isn't just about Darien. This is about the future of the Pack, of Sylvorn. You may not see it now, but you will. When the dust settles, you'll understand." "Maybe," she said, shaking her head, "but not like this. Not with betrayal." Chaol's gaze hardened as he turned away, his back to her once more. "Then you've already made your choice, and so have I." As Chaol's figure disappeared into the shadows, Selene felt the weight of the world pressing down on her. She was no longer just Selene, the rejected mate, the outsider. She was now a key player in a war that would determine the future of the kingdom she called home. The battle was no longer just for the throne, it was for her heart, her future, and everything she had ever believed in. The days following Chaol's departure felt like a haze to Selene. She had made her choice, but the weight of it still pressed heavily on her chest. The kingdom was in turmoil, the lines drawn between Darien's supporters and Chaol's faction, but even with the conflict surrounding her, Selene found herself alone in her thoughts more often than not, her mind consumed by the events that had unfolded. She had chosen Darien, but the reality of their situation was far from what she had imagined. Despite their bond, despite the promises he had made, she couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty. She had seen the man he could be, the man who had fought for his kingdom, for her, but she had also seen the darkness in him, the secrets he was hiding. The truth he had shared with her had changed everything. Could she trust him completely? Could she forgive him for what he had done? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Selene found herself standing at the edge of the castle grounds, looking out over the vast expanse of land. The air was crisp, the breeze carrying with it the scent of the trees and the distant sound of the river. It was a moment of quiet solitude, a rare gift amidst the chaos of the kingdom's unrest. The sound of footsteps behind her made her tense, and she turned to find Darien approaching. His expression was unreadable, his eyes dark with something she couldn't quite name. He stopped a few paces away from her, his presence imposing yet somehow gentle in the stillness of the evening. "You've been avoiding me," he said, his voice low but steady. Selene's heart tightened. She hadn't meant to avoid him, but the space between them seemed necessary. She needed time to think, to process everything she had learned, to decide what her place in all of this was. "I'm not avoiding you," she replied, though her voice was strained. "I just need time, Darien. There's too much that's happened, and I'm still trying to figure out where I stand." Darien's gaze softened, and he took a step closer, though he didn't reach out to her. He respected the distance she needed, but Selene could see the pain in his eyes. "I know I've asked a lot of you," he said quietly. "I know that I've hurt you. And I regret that more than you can understand." She looked up at him, her breath catching in her throat. "I'm not sure I can forgive everything, Darien. You've kept so much from me. I don't know if I can move forward with all of this. Everything you've done, the secrets you've kept. It feels like I don't even know you anymore." Darien's face tightened, and for a moment, he seemed lost in his own thoughts. "I never wanted to hurt you, Selene," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I made choices I thought would protect you, but I see now that I was wrong. The secrets I kept, they were meant to keep you safe, but all they've done is drive a wedge between us. I should have trusted you. I should have shared everything with you from the beginning." Selene's heart ached at his words, but the pain was mixed with something else, a longing for the man he used to be, for the man he could still become. She had seen the good in him, the man who had fought for his pack, for her. But the man she loved was also a man who carried the weight of his choices, a man who had made sacrifices that had left scars on both of them. "I want to believe you," she said, her voice trembling. "I want to trust you again. But I need time. I need to see that you're truly ready to change, that you're willing to let go of the darkness you've been carrying." I can't just move on from everything, Darian. It's not that simple. Darian nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. I understand. And I'll wait. I'll wait for as long as it takes. I know I don't deserve your trust, but I'll do whatever it takes to earn it back. I will fight for us, Selene. I will fight for the future we can have together. A heavy silence settled between them, and for a long moment Selene wasn't sure what to say. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that the man standing before her was capable of change, capable of redemption. But her heart was still fragile, still healing from the wounds that had been inflicted. I don't know if we can just pick up where we left off, Selene whispered. But maybe we can start again, one step at a time. Darian's gaze softened, and for the first time in a long while, Selene saw a flicker of hope in his eyes. One step at a time, he echoed, his voice full of resolve. As they stood there, the weight of their shared history hanging in the air, Selene felt a sense of relief begin to settle over her. It wouldn't be easy. There were still so many challenges ahead, so many things they would have to face together. But in that moment, as the sun set behind them, she felt the first stirrings of something new, something she hadn't felt in a long time. The possibility of healing, the possibility of reconciliation. And for the first time in weeks, Selene allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could rebuild what had been broken. The castle felt different now. The air had shifted, carrying with it the faintest hint of hope that had not been there before. For the first time in what felt like forever, Selene allowed herself to take a breath and look ahead, rather than always lingering in the shadows of the past. She had made a choice, one that would determine the future, not only for her, but for the entire kingdom. The path she had chosen was not an easy one, and the challenges ahead were still daunting, but with Darian at her side she felt a flicker of possibility, however fragile it might be. The mornings were still filled with uncertainty, but the quiet moments they shared were slowly becoming more frequent, more comfortable. Darian had given her the space she needed to heal, to think. He hadn't pushed her, hadn't demanded more than she was willing to give. His patience, his unwavering commitment, had begun to break through the walls she had built around her heart. As the weeks passed, Selene began to see Darian in a new light. He was still the Alpha King, still the man who had fought for his kingdom, but he was also someone who had learned from his mistakes. Someone who had let her in, shared his burdens with her, and trusted her with his darkest secrets. The weight of his past no longer seemed like an insurmountable obstacle. Instead, it was part of who he was, and she had come to accept that, just as she had accepted her own flaws. One afternoon, they found themselves in the castle's garden, surrounded by the blooming flowers that had flourished despite the harsh winter. The sun was warm on their skin, casting a golden glow over the world. It was a simple moment, a quiet one, but it was everything to Selene. For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace. "I never thought I'd be here," she said softly, her gaze drifting over the vibrant flowers. "I never thought I'd find my place here, in this kingdom, with you." Darian's eyes were on her, his expression unreadable at first. Then his lips curled into a small, genuine smile, one that spoke of everything he had fought for, the future he had promised her. "You've always had your place here, Selene," he said, his voice full of conviction. "Not just in the kingdom, but in my life. I never meant to make you feel like you didn't belong. You are my equal, and I'll make sure you never doubt that again." Selene felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. She had always been part of this world, even when she didn't fully understand her role. But now with Darian, she felt like she was standing at the beginning of something new, something that was hers to build, to shape. "Do you think we can really do this?" she asked, turning to face him. Her voice was filled with uncertainty, but there was a spark of hope in her eyes. "Can we truly move forward after everything?" Darian's expression softened and he stepped closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "We've already taken the first step, Selene, together, and that's all that matters. The rest will come." The sincerity in his voice made her heart flutter. For so long she had wondered if she could trust him again, if she could find her place beside him after everything that had happened. But standing here now, with the future stretching out before them, she realized that the only thing she truly needed was the strength to keep moving forward with him. "I believe in us," she said, her voice steady, her heart full. "I believe in what we can build together." Darian reached out, his hand brushing against hers, a simple touch that spoke volumes. It was a promise, an unspoken understanding that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. "I'll never let you go, Celine," Darian said, his voice full of emotion. "No matter what comes, I'll stand by your side. Always." The air between them seemed to hum with a quiet energy, a shared resolve that neither of them could deny. There were still obstacles to overcome, battles to fight, but for the first time in a long time, Celine felt like she was no longer alone in this fight. Darian was with her, and together they would face whatever came their way. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the garden in soft golden light, Celine allowed herself to believe in the future they were creating. There would be difficulties, no doubt. There would be moments of doubt and fear. But for the first time, she was ready to face them with Darian by her side. With love, with trust, and with the knowledge that together they could build a future strong enough to withstand anything. And as they stood there side by side, the promise of tomorrow stretched before them, vast and full of possibility.